Alright, yesterday I stopped the video before we did the map skills. We're doing the map skills today, map skills 16. We're going to start by drilling the Midwest region. This will be on your next quiz, which will be next week.
North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan.
Alright, not so fast, but at the same time, you guys don't have to go North Dakota, South Dakota. Just say North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska,
Kansas,
right?
Minnesota,
Alright, let's do them out of order.
Minnesota, Missouri, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, Iowa.
Very good. Did we do this one?
Yes.
We didn't do
North Dakota,
Missouri,
Nebraska,
Minnesota,
Not Mississippi. Just say it. Stop talking and say it. Come on.
Minnesota,
Thank you.
Wisconsin,
Michigan, Ohio,
Indiana,
Illinois, South Dakota, Iowa, North Dakota.
All right. Now what we're doing on our map skills is writing down the names of those states. So we're going to start with number 1. Raise your hand. Who can tell me what number 1 is?
North Dakota.
No, number 1 is North Dakota. So I will write it on the board, and then you will be able to spell it correctly. North Dakota. It is a compound word. North and Dakota needs to be capitalized also. North Dakota. Map skills 16. Are you on map skills 16? Map skills 16, which is page 31. And then it will make more sense, huh? Map skills 16 is page 31. Alright, and number 2, Chase.
South Dakota.
South Dakota. So again, it's a compound word. This time you're writing the word South and then the word Dakota. North Dakota, South Dakota. Alright, for the most part, they do go in order, don't they? So number 3, what would it be? Riley?
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Spell somebody's pencil under there. I'm gonna drop my cap. Alright, number 3 is Nebraska. Nebraska. So make sure you look to spell it correctly. Alright, and Dane wants to do number 4. Number 4 is
Kansas.
Kansas. Alright, Kansas. There's how you spell Kansas. Alright. Let me know if I get to going too fast. Number 5. Hunter, what's number 5?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Very good. Number 5 is Minnesota. I should number these so you guys can keep track of where we are. And if you decide to write it ahead of me, then you need to make sure that you look back up here to make sure you spell it correctly. Minnesota. Minnesota with a T, not a D. Minnesota. Alright, which brings us to number 6, the one in the middle. Grant.
Iowa.
Iowa. Iowa. Pretty short. Iowa. And then number 7 is the one right underneath that. Put your hand down if you already answered. Yes, Joey?
Missouri.
Yes, Missouri. So we got M-I-M. Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri. And hopefully you remember that all of these need to be capitalized, right? Because they are all particular places, proper nouns. All right, after they do number 7, then they go back up to this one right here. Brantley.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. And I have a little bit more room to keep going down. Number 8 is Wisconsin. Just like it sounds, Wisconsin. And then they start going a little bit out of order after this. They do from 8 to this one. This is 9. Did you do one already? All right, what is it?
Illinois.
Illinois. All right, Illinois is a little bit tricky because that last letter is silent. Illinois. It ends in an S, but you do not hear the S. All right, after you write Illinois, then they make number 10 be this one that has actually 2 parts. Who hasn't done one yet? Please.
Michigan.
Michigan. I'm gonna write it up here because I'm having to get too low. And I will move this somewhat over so that the camera can see. Michigan. Please look how Michigan is spelled because it looks more like Michigan because it's a CH, not a SH. Sounds like a SH, but it is a CH. Michigan. Probably means it's French. Remember they said French words that have a CH a lot of times are French. They say shh. Alright, and then number 11 is this one right here. Who hasn't done one yet? Okay, I'm not gonna call on anybody but people who haven't done one yet.
I think everybody done one since.
No, because I have at least 12 people here today, don't I?
You have 11.
Oh, I do have 11, but I still have one person who hasn't participated yet. Who hasn't participated? Okay. So, what's that one?
Idaho?
No, we haven't even learned Idaho yet. Do you know what this one is? No, this one's Wisconsin.
Oh.
Illinois. So what's the one right beside Illinois? Illinois. If you can't tell me this one, can you tell me the one beside it?
Ohio.
Ohio. Alright, so number 12 is going to be Ohio. So everybody that knows what number 11 is, it is
Indiana.
Indiana. We got an I and an I and an O. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio. Alright, so number 11 is Indiana. So it has the word Indian with an extra A on the end. So it's Indiana. Indian with an extra A on the end. And then number 12 is Ohio, like he said. Ohio. Ohio. Another short one. Like Iowa. Alright, and that's it. But we need to read. So don't take your time, put it away. Don't. Guys, we don't do that. I want you to get back out, because I'm tired of you guys doing that. Just put it under your book. We'll put it everything away all at once. So just put it under your book. Close it and put it under your book, please. Close it and put it under your book while we read. Alright, this is one chapter, but it has 2 people in it. It has John Greenleaf Whittier and it has Louisa May Alcott. Both of them are authors. That means they wrote things. John Greenleaf Whittier wrote poems, and Louisa May Alcott wrote books. And today we're going to read totally about John Greenleaf Whittier, and then we'll continue on with Louisa May Alcott tomorrow. Alright, so let's look first of all. You can see only on this page the timeline. It looks like her timeline is much shorter than his timeline. He lived to be quite old, didn't he? John Greenleaf Whittier and Louisa May Alcott. Go and turn the page. Starting at the top of the page. Our American heritage includes well-loved authors such as John Greenleaf Whittier and Louisa May Alcott, who wrote about their daily lives and families. In fact, Louisa enjoyed reading Mr. Whittier's poetry when she was a child. Perhaps his writing influenced her to become a writer too. Alright, so that's just the introduction about both of them. Now let's start with John Greenleaf Whittier. Rhymes and verses. It was harvest time on the Whittier farm in Haverhill, Massachusetts.
Out in the fields, a young boy called Greenleaf could be seen beating the grain out of the tall stalks with his flail. So the flail is the tool that he used to beat the stalks of grain to get the part that they eat out, okay? The flail seemed to grow heavier with each swing. He stopped to rub his forehead with the back of his hand. Just then a poem began to dance through his head. John Greenleaf Whittier, thee has work to do, came the patient but firm voice of his Quaker father. Later on, Greenleaf wrote his poem down. And must I always swing the flail and help to fill the milking pail? I wish to go away to school. I do not wish to be a fool. All right, so he was very good at writing poems, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was a boy.
That's good.
John Greenleaf, read the names with me. Important names. John Greenleaf Whittier, a Quaker poet. And we've already learned about Quakers. Who else was a Quaker that we learned about? Elise?
William Clark.
Not William Clark.
William Penn.
William Penn, very good. All right, so William Penn. And also, does anybody remember somebody else that we learned that married? Or she was a Quaker and then later on she married in
Dolly Madison.
Dolly Madison. She grew up in a Quaker family also. All right, and then the next one is not a person's name, it's the name of his most famous poem. So that is Snowbound, the best loved poem of John Greenleaf Whittier. Then moving on, we have Louisa May Alcott, writer of Little Women and other books. And we will learn more of some of her other books too, but her most famous one is Little Women. Louisa May Alcott's most famous book. All right, top of the next page. It seemed that rhymes and verses were always going through his head. His mother and sisters enjoyed hearing them. His father loved Greenleaf, but he could see no sense in poems, especially when there was so much work to be done. They could sell farm products to make a living, his father thought, but what good was poetry? Poetry will not buy my son bread, he once said. Greenleaf was a quiet boy who loved to read. He enjoyed using his imagination to see the places he was reading about. He liked to pretend that he was the characters in the books he read. Since there were not many books in his home, he read the same few books over and over. Greenleaf was willing to walk for miles to borrow a good book to read. For more than 40 years, John Greenleaf Whittier continued to write poetry. He wrote 4 beautiful volumes of Christian poetry that spoke about his own love of God. For much of his life, his poetry did not earn him much money, but when he was older, he finally became successful. He wrote many poems about nature. All right, so his father said that poetry will not buy my son bread. In other words, you can't make a living writing poetry, but eventually he did make a living writing poetry, didn't he? So make sure you pursue your dreams. If that's your dream, pursue your dreams and keep trying. Don't give up. All right, so the most famous poem he wrote was called Snowbound. And we're going to focus on that and why he wrote it and when he wrote it. Just sit up though. All right, Snowbound. John Greenleaf Whittier's most loved poem is Snowbound. Written when he was 59 years old, this poem finally earned him great respect as a poet. In Massachusetts, where the Whittier family lived, the winter often brought wild and furious snowstorms. In his poem Snowbound, Mr. Whittier remembers one such storm. At the time Mr. Whittier wrote Snowbound, most of his family had already died. He wrote the poem in loving memory of the family that was so dear to his heart. All right, so he was thinking back to when he was younger, and there was this huge snowstorm. How many of you understand what snowbound would mean? What does snowbound even mean?
Snowstorm.
Okay, it is a snowstorm, but why is it snowbound? What are they saying? What happened? The snowstorm what?
Was making like big mountains of snow.
Yeah, so much so that they couldn't get out. Snowbound, they're like stuck. because it snowed so much, it's like covering the doorways and everything. But the thing is, if you on a farm and you have animals, can you say, oh, the snow's covering the doorway, too bad, I can't go feed the horses and the cows?
No, you have to push through it.
Yeah, you have to find a way to go feed those animals. They still need to be fed, don't they?
Yeah.
Alright, so this is some of the things he talks about in the poem. We're going to read part of the poem and talk more about it. So he is remembering. He's 59 years old. Most of his family is dead. And he's remembering the people that were with him when he was snowbound and the things that happened when he was snowbound. Alright, so here is the beginning of the poem on page 210. Every look. And you guys can read the poem with me and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Alright. The sun that brief December day rose cheerless over hills of gray, and darkly circled gave at noon a sadder light than waning moon. Alright, so just like when we're fixing to have a snowstorm, couldn't see the sun at all, and it was getting very dark. Even though it was in the middle of the day, it was dark, like when you have the moon out at night, and it's not even a full moon, it's a waning moon, which means it's going away, right? Mr. Whittier remembered how cold he was after the sun set, no matter what coat he put on, all right? You guys can probably understand that these days when we go outside, and even though we have our coats on, it is still so cold. So he wrote in the poem, read with me, the sun sank from sight before it set, a chill, no coat, however stout, of homespun stuff could quite shut out. Alright, so remember back in these days, they had to make a lot of their things. They wouldn't have had these big thick coats like we guys have been wearing to school because it's been so cold. They would have had homemade coats that they would have used the thickest material possible, but they could not help him stay warm in this such terrible cold. Alright, so he remembered hurrying to get the farm chores done, and he wrote this. So read what he wrote. Meanwhile, we did our nightly chores, brought in the wood from out of doors, littered the stalls, and from the mouths, raked down the herd's grass for the cows, heard the horse whinnying for his corn. So they want to get those chores done before this storm actually starts. For 2 days it snowed. When it stopped, the snowdrifts covered every object, changing the appearance of everything. So you guys can remember when it snowed really good. The last snowstorm we had, it wasn't that good to cover things. But how many of you know when it snowed so much and it covered things in your yard, and it just, even things that aren't that pretty, all of a sudden they look pretty because they're covered with snow. And it changes their shape and deforms their shape, and they look beautiful, right? So let's read what he wrote about that. And when the second morning shone, we looked upon a world unknown, a universe of sky and snow. The old familiar sights of ours took marvelous shapes. Strange domes and towers rose up where sty or corn cribs stood. So all the things that were in the farmyard, now they had this unique shape to them because they're all completely covered over with snow. But you can see where they are just by this weird dome or this weird tower of snow. He knew something was there. Even the fence along the road was buried, so he wrote, a fenceless strip that once was road. Alright, so all he could see was the snowdrift. He couldn't see the fence, and he knew that beyond that drift there was a road. His father ordered that a snow tunnel be shoveled from the house to the barn. The farm animals needed to be fed. And so on the next page, let's read what he wrote about that. A prompt, decisive man, no breath our father wasted. Boys, a path! Well pleased, for when did farmer boy count such a summons less than joy? Our buskins, which is boots, our buskins on our feet we drew, with mittened hands and caps drawn low, to guard our necks and ears from snow. We cut the solid whiteness through. Alright, so they have the normal chores, right? And those are just chores. But this time, their dad is telling them to make a tunnel to the barn, from the house to the barn, so they thought this was the most wonderful chore they'd ever had. How many of you think that would be fun? To dig a tunnel through the snow from your house to your barn. Well, that's the way they felt. They were used to all those other chores all the time, but this was a fun chore. All right, so let's read. The boys pretended that the snow tunnel was a legendary cave. You guys know Aladdin?
Yeah.
All right, when you're thinking of Disney Aladdin, well, that story is very, very old. Way before Disney turned it into a movie, there was a book about Aladdin and his cave and the magic lantern, and that's what they were comparing this tunnel that they made into Aladdin's cave. So let's read what he wrote. And where the drift was deepest, made a tunnel walled and overlaid with dazzling crystals. We had read of rare Aladdin's wondrous cave, and to our own his name we gave, with many a wish that luck were ours to test his lamp's supernal powers. So think about it. This is a snow cave. You know how shiny snow is. So they're saying, oh, this is Aladdin's cave. And they're hoping that they can find that lamp that Aladdin found. The poem continues to tell how members of Mr. Whittier's family amused each other until a team of oxen plowed through to push the snow out of the roads. Now today, we have big trucks that come and snow plow the roads. But think about it, long ago, did they have big trucks to plow the roads? No, they had to have it plowed by a team of oxen. So that would have taken much longer to get plowed out if you were snowbound. Turn the page. Read the Bible says, for as the rain comes down and the snow from heaven, and returneth not thither, but watereth the earth, and maketh it bring forth and bud, that it may give seed to the sower and bread to the eater, so shall my word be that goeth forth out of my mouth. Isaiah 55, 10 and 11. Other important work. Along with writing beautiful poetry, John Greenleaf Whittier had other jobs. He worked as a newspaper and magazine editor. He wrote many articles and poems about ending slavery in the United States. Mr. Whittier also served 2 terms in government in the Massachusetts state legislature. The words to almost 100 hymns were written by John Greenleaf Whittier. He gave permission for many of his poems to be put to music. They have been sung in Methodist churches for many years. His most loved hymn, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, encourages believers to think about the peace God gives. The last book of poetry John Greenleaf Whittier wrote was called At Sundown. Sundown is the end of the day. Perhaps he was writing this as he thought about the end of his own life. He had spent his life taking a stand for what he believed and used his writing ability to make a difference. All right, answer these questions. For about how many years did John Greenleaf Whittier write poetry? Joey? 40. How many volumes of Christian poetry did Mr. Whittier write? Yes. 4. Very good. 4. What was Mr. Whittier's most famous poem? Hunter?
Snowbound.
Snowbound. Very good. And what was the poem written about? And you can just say this in 2 words. Okay, yes, it is about being snowbound, but who was the
His
poem?
family?
His family. He was writing about his family and their experiences when they were snowbound. So when I say, what was it about? You're telling me it was about his family. That is going to be the 2 things that link John Greenleaf Whittier and Louisa May Alcott together. They wrote about their families. Okay? Against what practice did John Greenleaf Whittier write articles and poems? He was against what? I just read it. That's one of the last things you read. He was against what?
Slavery and
Slavery.
Yeah.
You can just say slavery. Okay, because he was in the United States, so, but slavery. He was against slavery. He thought it was bad. Remember, this is before the Civil War, so this is back when there were people that still owned slaves. But he was against it. He thought it was wrong. And he's right, it was wrong. In what branch of Massachusetts government did Mr. Whittier serve? state legislature. Specifically, you wanna say state legislature, cause he was for the Massachusetts government, so that's a state, so it's a state legislature. The words to about how many hymns were written by Mr. Whittier? We just read that. All of these questions, almost all of them are coming from this last page we read. I'm gonna let somebody else answer, cause you've answered 2 questions already, right? Come on, guys, just start busy reading. You should have been paying attention as I read. About how many hymns?
100.
Yep, it said about 100 hymns. And what is the name of the last book of poetry written by Mr. Whittier? Yes,
Sundown.
almost. There was, what was the first word?
Sundown.
No, that's the second word.
At sundown.
At sundown. Very good. At sundown.